He never fired a shot at Waterloo, but while cannonballs tore through Belgian mud and soldiers bled in the summer of 1815, Nathan Mayer Rothschild stood in London, waiting. Not for news of victory, for the price of victory, because wars don't end on battlefields. They end in counting houses. And Nathan Rothschild had just learned how to turn other people's wars into his family's empire. Let's rewind to 1777, Frankfurt, the Jewish ghetto, the Judengasse, a narrow, suffocating lane where 500 families were crammed behind walls. Jewish residents couldn't marry freely, couldn't move freely, couldn't even walk the streets after dark without risking violence. Nathan Rothschild was born here, third son of Mayer Rothschild, a coin dealer and trader who dealt with princes but lived like a prisoner. By the time Nathan was 21, he'd had enough. In 1798, he left Frankfurt for England, not to escape, to expand. His father had a plan: 5 sons, 5 cities, one family firm stretched across Europe like a web. Nathan got Manchester, industrial, booming, dirty, a place where a German Jew with 20,000 pounds and decent English could disappear into the textile trade and make a fortune. And he did. For a decade, Nathan bought and sold cotton, worsted, velvet. He worked through agents in Hull and London, shipping goods back to his father and brothers on the continent, threading contraband through Napoleon's blockades like a smuggler with a ledger. But textiles were just the beginning. By 1809, Nathan moved to London, not to the fashionable West End, to the city, St. Swithin's Lane, a cramped medieval street near the Bank of England and the Royal Exchange. He leased a building called New Court for £750. It wasn't grand. One visitor called it obscure-looking. But Nathan didn't care about appearances. He cared about proximity. New Court was a 5-minute walk from the men who controlled the flow of gold and government debt in the British Empire. And Nathan Rothschild was about to become the man they couldn't do business without. So let's talk about how this actually worked. Because what Nathan built wasn't just a bank. It was a system, a machine for moving money faster, safer, and more secretly than any government could manage on its own. Here's the problem Britain faced in 1811. Napoleon controlled most of Europe. French armies were everywhere, and the Duke of Wellington's troops in Spain and Portugal needed to be paid. In coin, not paper, not promises. Gold and silver on the ground in hostile territory. The British government tried using traditional methods. Ship gold across the channel. Hope it doesn't get captured. Hope the exchange rates don't bankrupt you. Hope your allies don't just pocket the cash. It was slow, expensive, dangerous. Nathan had a better idea. He didn't ship gold. He transmitted it, using his brothers. One brother in Paris, one in Vienna, one in Naples, one in Frankfurt. All of them connected by coded letters, trusted couriers, and an internal system of credit that let the Rothschilds move value across borders without moving a single coin. Here's a simplified version of how it worked. The British Treasury gives Nathan a contract. Nathan buys gold in London, sometimes from the Bank of England itself. Then instead of shipping it, he sends a letter to his brother James in Paris or Salomon in Vienna. That brother uses local funds to pay Wellington's troops. Meanwhile, Nathan collects payment in London and profits from the exchange rate, the commission, and sometimes the appreciation of the gold itself. No ships, no risk of capture, just information, credit, and timing. From 1811 onward, Nathan Rothschild became the man who paid the British Army. And Wellington, brilliant on the battlefield, clueless with money, trusted him completely. The system worked so well that by 1815, Nathan wasn't just moving British gold. He was moving subsidy payments to Britain's allies, Austria, Prussia, Russia. Millions of pounds flowing across Europe in the middle of a war. All of it filtered through 5 brothers who wrote to each other in Judendeutsch, a hybrid of German and Hebrew written in Hebrew characters. So no one else could read their letters. They called it the Rothschild Network. Governments called it indispensable. And Nathan? He called it business. But here's what made Nathan different from other merchants of his time. He understood speed, not just the speed of information, though that mattered, but the speed of decision. There's a description of Nathan at the London Stock Exchange that's been preserved in the archives. An anonymous observer wrote, "He leaned against the Rothschild pillar, hung his heavy hands into his pockets, and began to release silent, motionless, implacable cunning." The Rothschild pillar. That's what they called it. A column in the Royal Exchange where Nathan stood every day. Watching, listening, calculating. People would approach him, whisper information, make offers, and Nathan would barely move. Just a glance, a nod, sometimes nothing at all. But that stillness was deceptive, because inside that mind, thousands of variables were processing. Exchange rates in Amsterdam, political risk in Vienna, grain prices in Warsaw, the health of the Austrian emperor, the mood of the British treasury. Nathan once said, "I never refuse a fair profit." But he also said, "I require a good deal before I make up my mind." What he meant was this: the profit had to be worth the risk, and the risk had to be calculable. Other merchants gambled. Nathan hedged. He built redundancy into every transaction, multiple routes, multiple partners, multiple outcomes. If one brother's operation collapsed, the others could absorb it. If one government defaulted, the others would compensate. If one market crashed, another would rise. That's why when Wellington stood at Waterloo with the fate of Europe in the balance, Nathan Rothschild wasn't panicking. He was positioned. Whatever happened, he'd survive. Preferably, he'd profit. Now, June 1815. Napoleon has escaped from Elba. He's back in France. The armies of Europe are converging in Belgium for one final confrontation. In London, panic. If Napoleon wins, British government bonds, called consols, will collapse. If Wellington wins, they'll soar. Everyone in the city is watching, waiting, desperate for information. And here's where the legend begins. For almost 200 years, people have claimed that Nathan Rothschild was the first person in London to know that Wellington won at Waterloo, that he had carrier pigeons or secret couriers, or a man on horseback who rode through a storm to reach him before anyone else, and that Nathan used this information to manipulate the market, that he pretended Wellington had lost, sold consols, drove the price down, panicked everyone. Then, when prices hit rock bottom, bought everything. And when the official news arrived, he made 20 million. It's a hell of a story. It's also not true. Let's look at what actually happened. Waterloo was fought on Sunday, June 18th. The official British dispatch, carried by a man named Henry Percy, didn't reach London until late Wednesday night, June 21st. But other information arrived earlier. A man identified only as Mr. C of Dover was in Ghent, Belgium, on Monday the 19th, when news of the victory reached the exiled French King Louis XVIII. Mr. C immediately traveled to London via Ostend, probably arriving sometime Wednesday. And on Wednesday morning, he was telling his story publicly in the city. Newspaper reports of his account appeared by noon. So the first person in London to know about Waterloo, based on the surviving contemporaneous record, wasn't Nathan Rothschild. It was Mr. C. But Nathan did receive early information. The Caledonian Mercury, an Edinburgh newspaper, published a report on Wednesday evening. Their London correspondent wrote, "Good news to be relied upon. Lord Wellington was joined on the 18th by 20,000 Prussians under Bülow and beat Bonaparte completely, taking nearly the whole of his artillery. Omnium is now up at 6. This I have from good authority, one who has seen a letter from Ghent, received by Rothschild, the great stockbroker, whose information is invariably the best. He is now at the Foreign Office." So Nathan received a letter from Ghent, probably Wednesday afternoon, before the official dispatch. And yes, he probably traded on it. But he didn't manipulate the market. The price of Omnium, the key government security, never collapsed. It opened Wednesday at 4.75% premium, climbed to 6, dropped back to 4.75 by close. That's not a crash. That's normal volatility during a period of uncertainty. And Nathan's profit? Probably modest. If he bought Wednesday afternoon at 5% and sold Thursday at 8%, that's a solid overnight return. Worth the description, "doing well," as one of his employees later noted in a letter. But it's nothing compared to the fortunes made by others that week. The original contractors to that month's government loan, at the time, the largest ever raised, had acquired consols at par. They could take on holdings as large as they wanted. Some of them made millions. Nathan arrived late. He had early information, but so did others. He profited, but he didn't engineer a panic, and he didn't make a killing. So where did the legend come from? 1846, Paris, a political pamphlet titled Histoire édifiante et curieuse de Rothschild Ier, Roi des Juifs. Edifying and Curious History of Rothschild I, King of the Jews. The author signed it Satan. It was an attack on Nathan's younger brother James, by then the richest banker in France, and it included a lurid, fabricated tale. Nathan at Waterloo. Nathan bullying a fisherman to ferry him across the channel in a storm. Nathan reaching London a full day early. Nathan making 20 million in a single stroke. This family, the pamphlet declared, is our evil genius. The story spread, and with each retelling, it grew. By the late 19th century, new details appeared. Nathan didn't just profit, he deceived. He sold consoles, started rumors of defeat, ruined other investors, then bought everything at rock bottom. It's the image of the Jewish financier as Shylock, scheming, ruthless, feeding on the blood of nations, and it stuck. Even respectable historians repeated it, even the Encyclopedia Britannica, even the Dictionary of National Biography. In 1940, the Nazis made a propaganda film about it. Die Rothschilds, Axion of Waterloo. The Rothschilds, shares in Waterloo. It portrayed Nathan as a monster who profited from French deaths. The film was shown across occupied Europe. The legend became a weapon. But here's what's real. Nathan Rothschild didn't need to cheat. He'd already won. By 1815, the Rothschild network was the most sophisticated financial system in Europe. Faster than any government, more trusted than most armies, and entirely private. After Waterloo, that system didn't shrink. It expanded. In 1818, all 5 Rothschild brothers, Nathan in London, James in Paris, Salomon in Vienna, Karl in Naples, Amschel in Frankfurt, signed a new partnership agreement. 3 joint firms, 5 partners, mutual responsibility, shared profits. They called it one general joint concern, and they used it to dominate European finance for the next century. Government loans. The Rothschilds arranged them. Britain, France, Austria, Prussia, Brazil, even the Papal States. In 1822, the 5 brothers were granted the title of Baron by the Austrian Emperor. Nathan, still an Englishman at heart, didn't use it, but his sons did. In 1824, Nathan co-founded the Alliance Assurance Company, breaking the monopoly held by Lloyd's in marine insurance. The company's presidents included his brother-in-law Moses Montefiore and Samuel Gurney, a Quaker banker. Directors included reformers and abolitionists. In 1825, Nathan arranged a £5 million loan to Prussia. Later that year, he supplied enough coin to the Bank of England to prevent a liquidity crisis. The governor of the bank reportedly said Nathan had saved them from collapse. By the mid-1820s, N. Rothschild and Sons was acknowledged as the foremost issuer of government loans in the world. And New Court, that obscure building on St. Swithin's Lane, became the place where ministers and monarchs came to borrow. But let's talk about what this meant. Because Nathan's power wasn't just financial, it was structural. For most of history, kings and emperors financed wars the old way, taxed their people, seize land, debase the currency, or borrow from local merchants at ruinous rates. The Rothschilds changed that. They created a system where governments could borrow internationally, where a loan issued in London could fund an army in Austria, where the credibility of the Rothschild name, not the sword, determined whether a state could survive. This was revolutionary because it meant that finance, not force, increasingly determined the fate of nations. A state that defaulted on a Rothschild loan couldn't borrow again, couldn't fund its military, couldn't compete. So governments became careful, they balanced budgets, they honored debts, not because they were virtuous, because they were dependent. Nathan Rothschild didn't conquer Europe. He financed it. And in doing so, he turned the logic of power upside down. The German poet Heinrich Heine, a Jewish convert to Lutheranism, put it perfectly. He called Nathan one of three terroristic names that spell the gradual annihilation of the old aristocracy. The first was Cardinal Richelieu, who destroyed the feudal barons. The second was Robespierre, who beheaded the weakened remnants. The third was Rothschild, who created a new aristocracy, not of land, of liquidity. Heine also said, "Money is the god of our time, and Rothschild is his prophet." It wasn't a compliment, but it was true. Now let's talk about something that doesn't appear in most histories, the human cost of this system. Nathan Rothschild made his fortune during 20 years of near-constant war. The Napoleonic Wars killed somewhere between 3 and 6 million people. Soldiers, yes, but also civilians, starved by blockades, crushed by occupying armies, worked to death producing munitions and supplies. Nathan didn't cause that suffering, but he profited from it, directly. Every loan he arranged to a government at war funded more soldiers, more guns, more battles. And every time he moved gold to pay Wellington's troops, he enabled another campaign, another siege, another slaughter. Did Nathan think about that? Probably not often. He saw himself as a businessman serving clients. Governments came to him. He provided a service. He charged a fair price. But fair is a relative term when your clients are desperate. Consider Brazil. In 1824, Brazil had just declared independence from Portugal. The new empire was broke. It needed loans to survive. Nathan arranged the financing. £2 million at 75% of face value. That means Brazil received $1.5 million in cash but owed $2 million, plus interest. Was that fair? To Nathan, yes. The risk was enormous. Brazil was unstable. It might default. It might collapse. 75% reflected that risk. But to Brazil, it was extortion. They had no choice. Without the loan, the empire would fall. So they borrowed. And for the next decade, they struggled to make the payments. Nathan's agent in Rio de Janeiro was a firm called Samuel Phillips and Company, run by members of the Samuel family. Jewish merchants originally from Frankfurt. They were friends, relatives by marriage, part of the network, and they were ruthless. They cultivated Brazilian government officials, hosted them, bribed them, took a cut of the profits. They handled diamonds, dyewoods, cotton, whatever the Brazilian treasury could scrape together to send to London. When Brazil couldn't meet a dividend payment, Samuel Phillips and Company would advance the funds, at interest, deepening the debt. By 1831, the Brazilian government was so furious with Nathan's high-handed treatment that they fired him. They switched to Samuel and Phillips as their financial agents in London. Nathan was stunned. He wrote angry letters, complained to ministers, insisted Brazil was being unjust. But the truth is simpler. Nathan had treated Brazil like a debtor, not a partner, and eventually even desperate governments pushed back. Let's shift to another uncomfortable truth. Slavery. In 1833, Britain abolished slavery throughout its empire. It was a moral victory celebrated across the nation. But abolition came with a price tag. Plantation owners in the Caribbean and other colonies had to be compensated for the loss of their property, meaning the enslaved people they could no longer legally own. The British government needed £15 million immediately. Where could they get it? Nathan Rothschild and Moses Montefiore. They arranged the loan, the government borrowed the money, the plantation owners got paid. And the enslaved people? They got freedom, but no compensation, no reparations, no land, just the legal right to stop being property. Meanwhile, Nathan and Moses collected interest on £15 million for decades. Now, to be fair, they didn't create slavery. They didn't defend it. Moses Montefiore, in particular, was a philanthropist and Jewish rights advocate. But they profited from its end. And that profit came from a system that had tortured and killed millions of Africans over centuries. The loan was finally paid off in 2015. That's right. British taxpayers were still making payments on the slavery compensation loan. To the financial descendants of the original lenders, until 7 years ago. Does that make Nathan Rothschild a villain? Not exactly. He was operating within the legal and economic framework of his time. But it does complicate the story, because the fortune that Nathan built, the dynasty that still exists today, was constructed in part on the backs of enslaved people who never saw a penny. And then there's the question of loyalty. Nathan Rothschild was Jewish, born in a ghetto, raised in a culture that had been persecuted for centuries. When he came to England, he brought that identity with him. He married Hannah Cohen, daughter of a prominent Jewish merchant. He remained observant. He gave generously to Jewish charities. He helped fund the campaign for Jewish emancipation, the legal right for Jews to hold public office. But he also worked for Christian governments. He financed Christian armies. He navigated a world where anti-Semitism was casual and constant. So where did his loyalty lie? To his faith? To his family? To Britain? To profit? The answer is probably all of the above, and none of them. Nathan was a pragmatist. He used his Jewish networks when they were useful. He used Christian connections when they were necessary. He adapted, survived, thrived. But that adaptability came at a cost, because it meant he was always slightly outside, never fully trusted by the establishment, never fully embraced. Even at the height of his power, Nathan was still the Jew banker, respected, feared, indispensable, but never quite one of them. There's a story that after Waterloo, the British government offered Nathan a knighthood, a recognition of his service, an honor that would have elevated his social status. Nathan turned it down. Why? We don't know for certain. Maybe he didn't want to convert to Christianity, which might have been expected. Maybe he preferred his Austrian title of Baron, or maybe he understood that accepting would make him a target, a symbol of Jewish power that anti-Semites could attack. His brother James, writing from Paris, couldn't believe it. "The honors of the knighthood," he wrote, briefly abandoning his usual German-Hebrew hybrid to use English. He was baffled. But Nathan knew something his brother didn't. In England, visibility was dangerous. Better to be powerful and obscure than titled and exposed. So he stayed Mr. Rothschild, and he stayed at New Court, and he kept his head down and his ledgers balanced. Nathan Rothschild died in Frankfurt in 1836. He was 58. He traveled there to attend his son Lionel's wedding, but he fell ill, an infected abscess, and never recovered. His funeral procession left New Court on August 8th. 75 carriages, contingents from the Jews' Orphan Asylum and the Jews' Free School. The Lord Mayor of London attended, so did 3 police superintendents. They buried him in the Brady Street Ashkenazi Cemetery in Whitechapel, next to the ghetto where London's poorest Jews lived. His wife, Hannah, was later buried beside him. By the time he died, Nathan's personal net worth was equivalent to 0.62% of British national income. To put that in perspective, if someone held that share of the U.S. economy today, they'd be worth about $150 billion. But Nathan's wealth wasn't just personal, it was dynastic. His sons continued the business. Lionel, his eldest, became senior partner in London. And in 1858, after an 11-year struggle, Lionel became the first Jewish member of parliament allowed to take his seat. For decades, Jewish men in Britain had been blocked from parliament by the oath of allegiance, which required swearing on the true faith of a Christian. Lionel refused. He was elected. He showed up. But the House wouldn't seat him, so he ran again, and again, and again. Finally, in 1858, Parliament changed the wording of the oath. Lionel took his seat, and the doors opened for Jews across Britain. Nathan had paved the way for that too. In the 1820s, he and Moses Montefiore had led the campaign for Jewish emancipation. They lobbied ministers, organized petitions, used their wealth and influence to argue that Jews deserved the same rights as Catholics and Quakers, both of whom had recently won political equality. Nathan never lived to see his son in Parliament, but the system he built made it possible. Because money in the end bought access, and access bought change. Now, 2 centuries later, New Court still stands. It's been rebuilt 4 times. The current building, 15 stories of glass and steel, was designed by Rem Koolhaas and opened in 2010. Inside, there's a reading room for the Rothschild archive, oak-paneled, quiet, overlooking the church of St. Stephen Walbrook. You can walk in and read Nathan's letters, coded, careful, obsessed with exchange rates and political risk. You can see the desk where, in 1875, his son Lionel advanced £4 million to Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli to buy a controlling stake in the Suez Canal. That deal, negotiated in secret, executed in days, gave Britain dominance over the route to India for the next 80 years. It was classic Rothschild, fast, quiet, consequential. And it started with Nathan's system, the one he built in a cramped building on a medieval lane, while Napoleon's armies marched and Wellington's soldiers waited for pay. Here's what strikes me most about Nathan Rothschild's story. He succeeded not because he was the smartest person in the room. He succeeded because he understood systems better than anyone else. He saw how information moved, how trust worked, how governments operated, and he built a business model that inserted itself into the gaps, the places where traditional systems failed. Governments couldn't move gold safely across Europe during wartime. Nathan could. Governments couldn't borrow internationally without risking default and diplomatic crisis. Nathan could arrange it. Governments couldn't coordinate financial policy across borders. Nathan and his brothers already did it every day. And once Nathan became indispensable, he could set the terms. That's not genius. It's positioning. But positioning requires vision. You have to see the future before it arrives. You have to recognize patterns while everyone else sees chaos. Nathan had that. The ability to look at a war-torn continent and see not danger, but opportunity. It sounds cold, and it was. But it was also how the modern financial system was born. Because after Nathan, no government could afford to ignore international finance. No state could operate without credit. No empire could expand without bankers willing to fund the venture. The world Nathan built is the world we still live in, where money flows faster than armies, where debt binds nations more tightly than treaties, where a financial crisis in one country can collapse governments halfway across the globe. Nathan didn't invent capitalism, but he perfected one of its core mechanisms. The idea that capital has no nationality, that profit has no loyalty, that in the end, the only thing that matters is the balance sheet. There's a quote from Nathan that's often repeated. Someone asked him about political risk, whether wars and revolutions worried him. Nathan supposedly replied, "I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England to rule the empire. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply." It's a powerful quote, and it fits the legend, but there's no evidence Nathan ever said it. It first appeared in the 20th century, long after his death, and it sounds more like a conspiracy theorist's fantasy than something Nathan, who was careful and discreet, would actually say out loud. But here's the thing, even if Nathan never said it, the sentiment wasn't far from the truth. By the 1820s, Nathan did have enormous influence over British finance. Not absolute control, he wasn't a dictator, but when the Bank of England needed liquidity, they came to Nathan. When the government needed a loan, they came to Nathan. When foreign states wanted British capital, they came to Nathan. He didn't control the throne, but he did control access to credit. And in a world where credit meant survival, that was almost the same thing. So what do we do with Nathan Rothschild? He's not easy to categorize. Not a hero, not a villain, just a man who saw an opportunity and took it. He built a system that stabilized European finance and made governments dependent on private bankers. He helped fund the defeat of Napoleon and profited enormously from the war. He advanced the cause of Jewish emancipation and worked within structures that oppressed millions of others. He left a legacy that includes modern banking, international finance, and dynastic wealth, but also exploitation, inequality, and the seeds of conspiracy theories that have fueled anti-Semitism for 2 centuries. Maybe that's the real lesson. That power is never clean, that every fortune has a cost, that the people who shape history are rarely the ones who pay its price. Nathan Rothschild didn't buy an empire with armies. He bought it with ledgers, and the pen, as it turns out, was mightier than the sword. Not because it was moral, because it was liquid. And liquidity, in the end, is the only currency that never loses value.